Hi, good morning. Yeah, the topic I want to talk about today is being the daughter of a pedophile and the impacts on that, the impacts on your relationships with community, with family, and your relationship with yourself, your identity. What are the impacts? How has that been for me? I'm going to be 69 next month, so I've been through a lot about the impacts and the influences and the fallout, and good fallout and bad fallout of being a daughter of a raging pedophile. So this is something we rarely ever talk about, and I think as clinicians it's good to hear this conversation because you will be sitting with many people who've been through a lot. I have not fully fleshed this completely out. So the best way for me to talk about it is to talk about it from my own history, because that's what I know the most, right? I have sat with lots of people who were children of pedophiles. But I don't know that we've really researched that much. Everyone has a different experience and everyone has a different fallout. Um, and it has influenced their lives in many different ways. So I think the best way to start is to talk about how did it impact me in a family way, and in a systemic way with systems as well. So I'll talk about family first. So I guess my mother was a Russian Mennonite. I'll start with that. My mother was a Mennonite woman, a very tiny little 82-pound Mennonite woman. I did not live with her very much. So I don't have a huge, I can't tell you a lot about her, and I can't tell you a lot about her people. But what I can tell is what the inside job is on me about that, and what I observed looking at the Mennonite family and extended family, and how disconnected uh, we were from that family. Her brothers and her, I don't know, her aunts and uncles, or even her brothers for that matter, had very, very little contact with her. And I don't know, sometimes I suspect there was abuse there, sexual abuse there, but I don't have, I can't be completely sure. I know that there was some sexual inappropriateness between uncles and myself and my sister here and there that was not comfortable, but we had very, very little contact with them. What I can say is my mother was homeless, hungry, starving, left. I don't remember being invited to any birthdays or to any Christmases, and she was like really, really abandoned by the Mennonite community. And her parents helped a little bit where they could here and there. But it was a horrifying abandonment because of, I suspect, the man she married. And I'll never know everything there, right? But what did that do to me? That family, the whole Mennonite cluster, would actually abandon this woman with her children and let them starve on the side of the road, right? What did that mean about my relationship with the Mennonite community? It really meant that there was a huge block. I really wanted nothing to do with any of them. I felt they had really hurt my mother, right? And my mother was a delicate little flower, so to speak. I did try spiritually to connect. I even went to Germany, to Holland, to Russia, seeing if I could feel some of those roots and those ancestors, right? But it never really connected. There was a bit of a connection with my grandfather, who was a very tinkering man who could do a lot of things with machines. And I thought, well, maybe some of my technical, because I was I was in the technical field, in the engineering telecommunications field for 17 years, way back, when women didn't do that. And I did have an affinity for technical work. So I wondered if that was sort of, but I could never connect with the spiritual roots. And then what do you do with, so that's on my mother's side. So really, what I will say, it broke family relations. Pedophilia broke, and I think it was the primary cause, but I'm not sure if it's the primary cause. I mean, one of the things I heard a lot from the closest Mennonite family members when I was a child here and there, and again, I had very little exposure to them, was, we're half breeds, you're French, you're Indian, you're lots of negative reasons why this breach between my mother and her family occurred. But I still feel pedophilia was the worst. They knew. I mean, I told grandparents and told an aunt, and they knew that the kids were being left to live with a pedophile, and they did nothing about that. So that was that ended something in me as a daughter of a pedophile. That ended something. And I'm sure that's really true for many daughters and sons of pedophiles, these huge breaches of love that destroy connections, and it's really hard to even spiritually reform them, to try to reconnect ancestrally. It's difficult, although I did thought that St. Petersburg, Russia looked pretty good. At least I gave it an attempt. And then I want to talk about my dad, who was really from Saskatchewan and moved to Manitoba, and met my mother in Manitoba, and he was from Saskatchewan, and from they came to Saskatchewan through North Dakota number of generations before that. I always considered them to be the road Métis, part of the road allowance Métis, looking for some land to settle on, and they finally settled on some land in Saskatchewan, where my father's father, or was it his grandfather? I'm not sure. All I know is that my sister knows better the stories of my father's people, because she had more access to, I didn't live with my older sister that much, so she had more access to my grandfather on my father's side. He was a beater. I always loved that he was a beater. He was beating a lot of, he beaded all sorts of leather goods and stuff like that. And he had Clydesdale horses, and he was the person out in the community that would take the doctor to different houses with his Clydesdale team of horses. I loved the stories about my family, but I don't know my relatives there, which again comes back to being the daughter of a pedophile. So I was trying to track a little bit, because not a single family member on my father's side would have anything to do with us children either. Again, a raging pedophile. And of course, the terror of connecting with them on our parts. Did he hurt those kids too? And I know that there are stories that one boy died, committed suicide because of my father's abuse. So it's just got endless breach of connections when you're a daughter of a pedophile. And it'll be different for everybody who's a daughter of a pedophile. So, there's a kind of a deep loneliness that comes with that positioning, a deep a hole in some ways that we've always lived with as children of a pedophile. Oh, but what did happen is we children of a pedophile became very close, although we did not live together much. And again, the 60s scoop really decimated our family. And some family members are only just finding their way home now. And this system scoop was horrendous on families like mine. It was just terrible. So, I have tried to follow what were the Turcots doing. Again, sort of looking at it more generally than looking specifically at my family, because that's way too painful to go meet someone and you're going there and you're wondering, what damage did my dad do? Because he wasn't just a little pedophile, he was a huge pedophile. I don't know how many people he abused, but it was a terrifying, he was a terrifying man. And I'm glad he broke from his body and he was able to leave that broken brain body person that he was on this earth to set that down. So when I looked at the Turcots in Saskatchewan, sorry, my internet went out there for a minute. I don't know what this video is going to look like now, but it's come back on. When I looked at the Turcots in Saskatchewan, the ones that came from North Dakota, Turtle Mountain area, all the Grand Prairie area, Devil's something or other area, that came up into Saskatchewan, I wondered why would this man all alone with just only him come this way? And I guess that many families went alone, but I worried, did he come alone because he was cast out, because he was a pedophile? These are the things. Oh, don't know, the internet's really dicey here. Ooh, this topic is dicey, so maybe, who knows? Nobody wants you to talk about this, right? So anyway, when I was looking at the history of Turcots, and I don't know, there are many Turcots, a lot of them are Métis, and some of them started in Saskatchewan and then moved down to North Dakota. There was a lot of starvation, hunger. People were Métis were moving around trying to find places to settle. So, so again, what I wanted to say, the impacts of being a daughter of a pedophile on that story, is that it made it hard to connect with either side of my families. And so what happened to me there, being, aging out in Manitoba, and, growing up sometimes in the North End of Manitoba, we're mainly with Indigenous peoples. Mostly I grew up with Indigenous peoples, most of them First Nations, and many of them Métis. One of the things I did have is what I felt I had was I might not have family people, but I did have First Nations people. My deepest relationships on the streets of the North End or anywhere I happened to be. At one point we were on a farm a stepmother came into the picture. Michael Savage was her name, dark black hair. And we lived on something called Pipeline Road, where we kids were terribly brutalized and the neighbors did not help us. And I'm sure they didn't help us because they felt we were half-breeds or full-bred. She looked very, very Indigenous. But whatever the issues were, it seemed we were abandoned, particularly by anybody that was from the colonized state, right? From the colonial state. And then, but we felt we had family right within the relationships that we built within the Indigenous community as children. That's where we would run to when we wanted food. The neighbors had bed bugs like we had bed bugs. They were hungry too. So there was this feeling of home with the kids, with the First Nations and Indigenous children and the half-breeds like me. Like we had each other. The kids. It was the kids that were, nobody said much about being the daughter of a pedophile. And even if they knew my dad was going to get them, they would run away from my dad, but they didn't run away from us kids. Kids didn't run away from kids. Adults ran away from kids. Stay away from that family. Don't go there. Don't play with those kids. Don't ever go into that house, right? Though that we lived with that all the time. But those, I always felt at home in the Indigenous communities and I never left there. That was my home. And I never could connect to land that didn't have Indigenous peoples because of those child relationships. I think that had a lot to do with it. The kids loved each other, regardless of skin color, regardless of experiences. It was rough. North End was a rough place to grow up. Anybody from the North End will know that that's a rough place to be. But there were deep relationships and people you could count on. Rudy, who would sneak liver from the kitchen that his mother would make because he knew I was starving and bring me a piece of liver to chew on. Like, awesome. Never forget loving relationships with Indigenous children, other Indigenous children from all sorts of oppressed experiences that were horrific. We were living in horrors together. It was when I went into a foster home that I was kind of shocked because I'd never been in that kind of white environment. And I felt so out of place because I didn't know how much water to put in a bathtub. I didn't use my fork right. I didn't, I could never, that's not how, we didn't sit at a table and eat. We ate wherever we could get stuff, and trying to fit into a Western lens kind of family just wasn't, I couldn't do it. It never worked for me. I was always an outsider, so I was basically an outsider everywhere as a daughter of a pedophile. But where my heart lived was in land, because land always accepted me. And I could move on any land. I mean, there are some lands that are way more powerful for me, like Peguis, where I'm a member of the bear family there. I know where my bones are going to settle. There's a graveyard there, and I'm allowed to die there. I'm not a First Nations person. I'm not part of the band, but I'm part of a family where the land has always spoken to me. As a young, in my 20s, I was named there in ceremony, and it's where I was invited to be family. And regardless of being a daughter of a pedophile, right? I was honored, I was accepted, I was loved, and I still am. And it's a home for me. There have been many homes for me because I'm such a floater. I think I'm still that road allowance Métis that runs across the country. Some years I'm only home, 20 to 40% of the time. Most of my life has been spent in First Nations communities, working, because I've been on the road working. I remember when I was making To a Safer Place, I had to be sure we didn't talk about any Indigenous roots, or child sexual abuse in the country would be seen as the Indian problem, right? You have to be very careful. So I understood my privilege of being red on the inside and white on the outside. I'm a privileged Indigenous woman. I'm very privileged. I can walk anywhere. I don't face the same level of racism. As a child, I did. As a child, I faced it all the time. But as an adult, I don't. I'm totally aware. And I always say to my son, we must never take resources away from Indigenous communities in any way, right? Whether it's education money or whatever, because we're privileged. We're privileged. We can go get gas and nobody's staring at us to see. We're not racially profiled wherever we go. We have enormous skin privilege, our color of skin. And I know that that some of my family is not as white privileged. They look a little darker than me, right? But to understand skin color has a lot to do with privilege, and it's just it's a very sad situation. I don't even know what I was talking about next, or where I was going with that, other than to say that that I have had an Indigenous life lived, and that's That's important to me. So I have a place where I know home is. Oh, I was talking about home. Where's home for the daughter of a pedophile? Well, home for me has been in many places because I've traveled through so many territories, and had been a visitor on so many territories. Um, Home for me has been James Bay. I I feel like they love me and I love them. So home is about love and interconnectedness for me as a daughter of a pedophile. If I can find that love, whether, and I maybe couldn't find it in the Mennonite community, and maybe I couldn't even find it in my own personal indigenous story, family story, but I could find it um, with indigenous peoples, children in particular, and that love shines so big. Like I don't feel a big hole anymore, or a loneliness, or at 69, I don't. I feel so blessed to have had a place in Indigenous culture, in Indigenous communities, and on Indigenous land that has held me. The land was my parent. I was raised by the land, not by parents, right? And I was also raised by Indigenous children who were always who always were playing or helping. We didn't have birthdays and Christmases and presents, or neither of my parents ever phoned me ever in my entire life. Neither. Neither father nor mother. And I'm okay, believe me. I've never received a birthday card from a parent in my entire life, or a gift, right? I'm okay because I have land, and the land has gifted me its medicines every single day of my life. And maybe I can't feel comfortable in a non-Indigenous environment. I can't feel home. I can't feel at home. I don't feel at home. It's not the same to be in a non-Indigenous environment for me, but I can be over there. I like that I can move in all realms. I can move anywhere, everywhere, and partly that's because of skin color. I don't know if this is helpful or meaningful to people, but I did want to find a time to talk about it. And it's not fully flushed out, but it is a something. So when you're working with children of pedophiles, really be mindful of the complexities and the identity distortions that happen, and the ancestral interruptions, and also the collective hurt about that. When I feel the hurt of being the daughter of a pedophile, I know it's a collective feeling. I know I'm not alone. This is how it is for us, right? And also the collective passion because of that. It's because I'm the daughter of a pedophile that I want to make every child's life safe. It's the biggest motivator of my life, is that this should never happen to children. And we have to do everything we can to help make it possible for children to live safe lives, to have safe lives, to not have starvation, to not have homelessness, to be cast between all sorts of foster homes and land here, there, everywhere. We need to do better for our children. We need to really help them when they live in situations where they're raised, where something like pedophilia is also part of that family and part of that community. Communities need to take a look at this and there's all sorts of things you can do to help a child in that environment, and to help the pedophile too, so that you can contain and stop that. Well, I hope it's helpful. Take good care. Know that I love you. Bye for now.